Hello there, beautiful. How are you doing today? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Joesephyr, and in today's Dissidia Final Fantasy Opera Omnia Should You Pull video, we're going to be talking about Vaan. Now, Vaan will be returning at the beginning of next week with his rework and brand new FR. We don't have a huge amount to talk about on his banner outside of Vaan's extra bits and pieces, but as a character that's never really been bad in the entire history of Dissidia, then it might be interesting to take a look at what he has. But can he stand up with other damage dealers of today like Tifa and Rinoa? If you'd like to find out more, then stay tuned and keep on watching. Before we get started on the video, don't forget to find me over on all of my other social media accounts, so Twitter, Twitch, Discord, and Patreon. And if you want to come find me on Twitch, I've been playing loads of Smash Bros recently, and I've been really enjoying myself with it. So definitely come along, because I play that at least once a week now over on stream. And if you want to come and play with me, it would be lovely to have you. Big old Sephiroth main, shocking nobody, I'm sure, so definitely come and consider having a look at that, as well as obviously covering Dissidia events as we go forward as well. And of course, over on Patreon, I do shout out one of my patrons every time I release a video, and today that person is going to be GGTube, who has Tidus as their title card, is very active in my Twitch chats and just comments and everything, so thank you ever so much for your support, and the same goes out to all of my patrons, because without you guys, I wouldn't be able to do what I do at the frequency in which I do it. And of course, don't forget to check out all of the other content creators out there for Dissidia Final Fantasy Opera Omnia, because they deserve your love too. So let's go ahead and take a look at the banner and what it has to offer for us today. So we're going to have a look at both of the banners here, and they're basically the same thing. You get Vaan and his full kit here, including his BT on one of the banners, or Minwu BT on the other, and Minwu BT being the only part of Minwu's kit that's present here. And then we have Edge and Dark Knight Cecil coming about as well with their Force enhancements and the returns of their LDs. Edge is a pretty cute pickup at this point. Like, I wouldn't go out of my way for either Dark Knight Cecil or Edge at this point. I think if you were going to use Edge, you would have done sort of earlier on, like at the very end of LD era, obviously it being like one of the last banners to have just LDs, going into FR era with the likes of Kryl or Reno or Garnet, that kind of thing. You're probably less likely to use it now, but he does still have his AoE 100% evasion niche, so maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe you might find your reasons to use him. Dark Knight Cecil, not so much, not really. Like, he's definitely not at his full capacity at this point, at least not until he gets his BT far later down the line. He's usable, but he's not one I would go out of my way to pull for. So let's talk about Vaan. Now, first things first, shout outs to Mediu for their translations over on Reddit. Vaan's rework does two things. It increases his hit counts, and it makes it take less time for you to get to the plus versions of his abilities. Now his follow-ups trigger every time you use his abilities, where with Red Spiral you get 7 HP dumps that go into 8, and then Whitewell you just have 7 HP dumps. But then Whitewell has splash damage, where Red Spiral is purely single target focused. And then, like I said, HP damage increases, or HP dump increases, but Red Spiral and Whiteout doing 8 HP dumps total to a single target, that's pretty nice. And then 7 from Whitewell Luminescence, plus the blind debuff that he has, also pretty nice. His LD doesn't really add a huge amount to what he has here, so he just gets a little bit of extra HP damage out of it, and his C90 gets reworked slightly here so that his EX does 8 HP dumps again. But because of the way his FR works, if you're planning on using it, you'll probably never use this button. Pyroclasm kind of goes back into obscurity again, like it has done many times in the past. Vaan also has his like special effect where he's always hitting for weakness damage, so elemental lockouts aren't quite such a big deal for him. However, he is very much in the camp of primary damage dealer in an environment where the likes of Tifa and Rinoa exist. So while having 8 HP dumps consistently is pretty nice, Tifa has a lot more than that for single target during her burst windows, and Rinoa does more than that during her Ultima phases across multiple targets. But Vaan does have some nice things added to his BT, such as the fact that you get max Brave cap up, which we always appreciate. Brave floors, which means that you can use this both offensively and defensively, because it's essentially unbreakability, and also makes it so that you're hitting with more damage between numbers. But in today's meta, you're probably finding that you're going to be hitting those Brave caps anyway. So the new thing that kind of changes with Vaan is his FR weapon. So he's partnered up with Machina. He has 4 HP dumps in it, which is always nice. So like more HP dumps is always good, particularly during a FR attack. He gives himself Mist, which is his I get loads of free skills ability for 4 turns, which is the same that comes from his LD. And he also quite uniquely makes it so that your other 2 party members also have free skill uses for the next 2 uses they have. And this, of course, plays into his force time, which is when a turn passes when a character using an ability doesn't consume ability use, and when a turn passes with a character having 20% or more of their max bravery. So when Vaan is attacking, you're likely to hit huge numbers with this, like 90% increases. And with other characters, if you're using the free skill uses, you get like 60 to 70%, which is still pretty respectable. The thing, again, with Vaan is that he's kind of directly competing for a party slot with the likes of Tifa and Renoa, who can have free turns to kind of build up their own gauge and then go into BT phase and just go off. Vaan lacking free turns rather than free skill uses does hurt him slightly. But the fact that the other party members can contribute quite nicely to his FR gauge going up pretty heavily, he's getting an additional 20%, which is significant, means you're probably going to need to do a little bit more setup for Vaan than you would do with either of our lovely ladies. So whether you go for Vaan or not, I think is going to be a taste thing. He is a damage dealer. The damage dealers all function fairly similarly in this point, in that you charge your FR gauge, you set up the character, they have their burst phase, they either wipe them out in one go or you have to do it again. And Vaan does pretty well at that. If you don't have Tifa, he's very, very good at single target focused abilities because he can, during his burst phase, crack out 90% increases on his force gauge whilst having a BT effect, and also having a FR ability that increases HP damage caps, which is really nice. And this is something that we do see a little more often going forward, but Vaan having it now is quite rare. So when you've got Vaan hitting 90% during burst phase, whilst also hitting extra damage caps, and his burst effect has extra damage caps, you'll find the amount of damage you can do with Vaan is pretty astronomical, and it's definitely comparable with the likes of Renoa and Tifa, but if you don't need him, because you already have those characters, are you going to pull for him? So now let's take a look at Vaan's Intersecting Wills, which is the event that's going to be coming with him. So we're going to be fighting Ultima the High Seraph again here as a Shinryu fight who has a lot of HP. She has 180 million HP, and being Ultima the High Seraph, you can't summon during this particular fight. And there are a fair few mechanics to it, in that she has the ability to heal herself after certain HP thresholds if she takes turns whilst the aura is active, and that aura is cancelled when she takes elemental damage 10 times. And she also does framed debuffs whilst hitting various HP thresholds and during her force time thresholds. But it's nothing that a quick placement of a Raijin debuff or an Aerith in your party can't fix, like, pretty much the entire time. You can use Minwoo to remove her turns. She doesn't have any response to, like, rebreaks or delays or anything like that. So realistically, 90 to 100, well, 90%, I will say, clears that you see on YouTube or Reddit or anything like that are gonna contain strategies where she just doesn't get a turn. Like, you can use Tifa. Tifa is fantastic for this fight if you don't want to pull for Vaan, because she does a lot of damage to a single target and will probably one-shot her during her BT phase if you set her up with the right party members. I am making an effort to try to not use the same characters twice in a month, and I used Minwoo, Core, and a tank in the last event, so I'm not going to use those here. But past that, there's not an awful lot you have to worry about. Her force attack can be pretty nasty. It's an AoE Brave HP attack that, if it breaks anybody, will follow up with an instant death attack. So you've got to be careful of that, but if you the idea being, if you're using Vaan, it will never hurt you because you can't be broken. So if you're worried about stuff like that, you can always do like those kinds of things. But past that, honestly, it's an Intersecting Wills. Most of these are fairly simple. So now it's time for Would You Pull? You guys know how all this works now. Of asking all of my patrons, thank you so much for your lovely votes and your comments as to whether they might be pulling on these banners and giving reasons as to why they're going to be doing that. And if you would like to be involved in the conversation, perhaps you'd like to consider supporting the channel through the Patreon link in the description box below. But of the 100+ people we asked, 31% of people are using gems on this banner, 42% of people are using 100 or more tickets, 25% of people are using less than 100 tickets, and 3% of people are saying no thank you. I'm actually kind of surprised that the gem total is that high. Like, I like Vaan. Vaan is a very fun character for me. But I'm only going to be using tickets on him, mainly because I've already spent pretty heavily on Minwoo. I still don't have Minwoo's BT, so I'm quite happy to go tickets heavy on Vaan. But because people have a lot of these high-end damage dealers, and a lot of people do have Vaan built already, I imagine that that would maybe be a semblance as to why people might want to pull for Vaan. Because I do think that if you have Tifa, those two fulfill similar enough roles that I think you can live with one and not the other. But let's take a look at some comments then, shall we? So, first things first, we have Chamberlain Skexis says, I'm pulling for Vaan with gems. He's a single target powerhouse that's always hitting for elemental weakness. His FR gives the same mist buff as his LD, gives party members 2 free skill uses, and has a built-in HP damage cap up by 20% when hitting weakness. To top it off, he's also an FR board character, so he's a great investment no matter how you look at it. I do have a couple of contentious points for this. I do agree. I do think he's really powerful. Let me just clarify that. I do think Vaan is really powerful. His FR giving 2 free skill uses to his party members, I don't think that's as big a deal as maybe other people think it is, because as much as it's designed to help Vaan's FR phase go through, and it means that you can pair him up with another damage dealer, like Tifa, if you wanted to, because, you know, having those extra skill uses on an extra damage dealer might be pretty nice alongside his BT buffs. And also the fact that he's an FR board character, so is Tifa. That's the only reason that I am hesitant on Vaan is the existence of Tifa. Like, Tifa does more damage, has a significantly higher HP dump count than Vaan does, is self-sufficient. You could argue that Vaan's FR could even benefit Tifa in a lot of ways, but when you're pulling in a game with limited resources, are you going to be pulling for basically the same thing twice, or are you pulling for a wider variety, especially characters like Hope or Celes or anything like that who fill a completely different role to a character that everyone already has, or a lot of players already have, that is considered the strongest of her class. If you don't have Tifa, Vaan is absolutely fantastic. I will not take that away from him. But are you going to use both of them? And outside of lockout content, that's a question that you're going to need to ask yourself. Multiracial Lion says, I pulled Vaan's BT during his rerun just for this. I could live without it until the rerun if need me, but I'd like to experience him at full capacity. I've got a good chunk of tickets I'll be using. Magic damage tends to be favoured, as does Brave gaining rather than damage. Vaan is an excellent single target choice that has some AoE application rather than the AoE specialist Renoa or single target specialist Tifa. He ignores all forms of lockouts and raises the damage floor of anyone else on the team just by being there. His FR conditions are incredibly easy to meet, making him a rare generalist FR character that does a boatload of damage. And the blind is icing on the cake. This is a great pickup I've been planning for months. I mean, maybe I'm being a bit skeptical on Vaan where everybody else feels like more strongly about him, because I do like kind of general characters, but I tend to prefer more specialist characters, so maybe that's a choice thing on my part. Again, I'm gonna be throwing tickets at Vaan. I've liked Vaan since he came out because he was very, very strong within his role, and he had a lot of nice extra benefits that he had. But if I'm trying to recommend Vaan to other players, I would say consider your options that you already have before sinking resources into a character that has similar roles to characters people have already had, maybe not quite as good at either of them as those characters, when we have other characters that are more elevated in their roles than Vaan currently is. And then finally, Sergeant Tuffy says, I'm torn. Vaan is good, heck, he's great. There's never been a point in the game where Vaan hasn't been great. He's one of those characters that always shows up and every time he gets a tuning pass. Well, the only problem is that I'm not sure how much I personally would actually use him when Tifa exists for single target damage. That said, he's still an absolute beast. Luna Freya existing means that he now can do some semi-turn hogging, which was one of the only things that kept him in shape before. He's a great pickup, but I'll probably just throw him some spare tickets and not a lot else. Vaan is great, but FRs worth skipping basically don't exist anymore. Gotta draw the line somewhere. This is a very good point, and it kind of exemplifies what I'm saying. It's not that, you know, me being, like, erring on the side of no when it comes to Vaan has nothing to do with whether I think Vaan is good or bad, because realistically, There's barely any bad characters released anymore. Like, barely any. It's rare that you see a character be an easy, no, you don't need to pull for that. And Vaan is very strong, but there are other characters that people already have that they might just find they want to use more and get more bang for their buck for the thing that they pulled for, rather than using a character once or twice because of lockout content. So, while I'm using tickets on it because I like Vaan, would I recommend him to other players? Honestly, I don't know. So now we ask the question, should you pull for Vaan? Now, I'm not going to talk too much about Dark Knight Cecil and Edge here because they don't have an awful lot coming here apart from their enhancements. But Vaan's damage is really high. It is very high. He hits very high HP caps. If you put him alongside the right characters, he can absolutely match up with the likes of Rinoa, Tifa, Minwu, etc. in terms of just raw numbers. And he has a BT effect that is unique in that it's both offensively focused and defensively focused. You can't be broken while it has that, while that effect is up, because your bravery can't go below 20%. And because he has the max brave cap HP ups, that's really solid as well. And so I find it very strange that I'm sitting here kind of going, yeah, but whenever I look at Vaan, because he is actually really good. Like, if he's the character taking full advantage of his FR, you can hit really high numbers really quickly. 90% increases are not a joke, but the 90% increases only come from Vaan, who doesn't have access to free skill turns. You can give him them through Lunafreya, absolutely, but there's a lot more setup that needs to be done in order for Vaan to do his maximum potential, whereas the likes of Tifa and Rinoa don't take quite as much. So where Rinoa has the ability to charge the FR gauge for herself, or Tifa just does so many HP dumps to a single target, it's eye-watering. Vaan doesn't have those things. He has slightly different perks, such as he can do AoE-ish, like you get splash damage off of White Whirl. He can do some bits and pieces, but like his EX button is pretty much redundant again if you're going to be using his FR. But I think that if you just want a wider variety of damage dealers because you don't want to be restricted to using the same one frequently, Vaan is absolutely worth a pickup. If you have his BT and blue armor and all of that stuff, green everything already, like I do, I think his FR is absolutely worth picking up because it's not as heavy an investment because you've already made the majority of it. But do I think that if you don't own Vaan, or anything for Vaan, but you own stuff for the other two, would I pull for him? Probably not. I would save my resources for Hope, Sellers, Sid Reigns. I mean, I have a bit of a fondness for Dorgan, but we'll get to that when we get to it. I think that Vaan has just a bit of generic syndrome, as opposed to that being a bad thing, and maybe that's why I feel kind of torn on him myself. Let me know in the comments below what you think of Vaan, because while I think he's very good, I just don't know if he's necessary. So that's going to be all for today's video. Thank you ever so much for tuning in today. As I said earlier, take a look at the comments below and let me know what you guys think of Vaan and whether you're going to be pulling for him. I think a lot of people feel a lot more positively about him than I do, but I definitely would need to get some more time in with him before I make more of a decision than the one I've already made, because he is a character that I like, and I'm sure that other players will too. And of course, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and click on the bell for notifications of other videos I might be making. And that's going to be all from me today. Thank you ever so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Take care.